Hey guys, so I wanted to do a quick video just kind of talking a little bit about Zagara, specifically why she got so much priority in the last week of CCL. And this is going to be a why the pros play Zagara, but I'm going to say it's kind of a mini version of it because she was played primarily during a time where she just had a miniature rework and she probably didn't have the balance that she needed, which caused her to be played when she probably shouldn't have been played. She should have probably just still been default banned. But that being said, I doubt she's going to get nerfed that much. And so I think this playstyle of Zagara is still something that's worth talking about. So if you're curious about what happened to Zagara, she got a mini rework. Her Baneling barrage went from 4 charges down to 2, and each charge launches 2 Banelings instead of 1. So you might be saying, well, Paradox, that sounds like it did nothing, except for it actually did something really important. One, because your cooldown is now recharging 2 charges at a time, because 2 charges is 1 charge, you can effectively have fire off twice as many Banelings per team fight, which is a significant buff. In fact, I've kind of mentioned this before, but Blizzard is not very good at balancing abilities that have charges on them. Once you get a charge on an ability, it suddenly allows the cooldown to be rolling while you've used that ability. You can hold an ability for another perfect moment and have a cooldown be running for another one of your abilities. We saw this huge buff when Cassia started getting more charges on her Q. So this one was kind of interesting because they actually doubled the value of each charge. They also adjusted some of her Q talents a little bit, but to kind of explain this, level 1, Volatile Acid, is a talent you can take. Banelings travel 50% further, and they do 20% more damage. Keep in mind that before, your Q was just kind of poke damage that was available, but now you're firing off twice as many Qs per fight. So that extra 20% goes a long way. It's worth twice as much. I mean, this talent is worth twice as much as what it used to be. And at level 7, Baneling Massacre. Gain 2 additional charges of Banelings and reduce the cooldown of Baneling Barrage by 0.5 seconds. Keep in mind, again, the cooldown is worth twice as much as what it was before because you're firing off 2 Banelings now. And so reducing the cooldown is huge. Gaining the 2 extra charges back was supposed to be their method of saying, oh, if you liked old Q build, you can still play old Q build, except for now, it's way stronger than that. So now that I've kind of explained what they've done to Zagara, let's watch this game. And this was a finals, grand finals of CCL, and spoilers, by the way, grand finals of CCL. If you don't want spoilers, then of course you stop watching it now. But this game was a really interesting game to watch because it showed the power of Zagara in her current state rather quickly. She did really well in a lot of the matches. She was banned in a lot of matches, and some people drafted specifically to deal with her. What that means is they drafted people who could eat the damage of all of her Banelings so that that damage didn't go throughout the team. But you can fire off your Banelings from pretty far away. In fact, you don't even need to get to the halfway point in the lane for your Banelings to be able to reach the enemy tower. And it does a pretty good amount of damage to the enemy structures as well. You're going to see the cooldown rolls pretty fast to get those 2 extra Banelings out. And he's able to take out half the turret before the enemies even try to answer it. He does throw the Zagara into the solo lane, and you've seen my Zagara videos in the past, primarily a solo lane bully, but you can run her in the 4-man. But she's such a bully in the solo lane that it's definitely safe to run her in the solo lane if you want to. And you can see he keeps throwing more damage and summoning more roaches, and he's even throwing his Hydralisk at the enemy towers. He's focusing all of his efforts in taking down these towers early. The benefit of taking down these towers early on a map like Tomb of the Spider Queen or any other map where the objective pushes is if you destroy the towers, there's less to destroy the objective. So if you're on a map like Infernal Shrines or Battlefield of Eternity, fewer towers means that your Immortal or your Punisher lasts even longer. And in this case, Fewer Punisher or fewer towers means that your objective lasts a little bit longer. Your spider, whatever they are, they're not spider queens. There is the spider queen, and these are, I don't remember what they're called. Someone in the comments will correct me, I'm sure. But yeah. So if you can get those turrets down early, it's very valuable for the objective. But on top of that, not just is it valuable for the objective, it's also just extra experience. Now, it's a small amount of experience, but it does add up, especially if you're not dying, and being on creep makes you rather safe. So they come down, they fight, and you can see just those extra bits of damage that are being thrown out pretty often are pretty significant. You can see even just the extra shots being fired off there was able to take down Ibtings very quickly, and he's able to get out with that extra movement speed on the creep. So while on creep, you no longer get the cooldown reduction that you used to do, but it's still pretty crazy how much value you get from these talents. Level 4, Envenom Spines. Level 4 is always a very debated talent here for Zagara players, Zagara mains, as well as the competitive environment. I'm always a big fan of Envenom Spines because you only need to land one auto attack to get value off of this, where this you need to be constantly stacking, so in the competitive environment, you're not going to get that many free attacks. Finally, Medusa Blades was the meta among Zagara mains because Zagara mains would generally take Infest, and so Medusa Blades was the highest siege damage you could have without using all your abilities all the time. And so you could stack up your Infest very quickly by using Medusa Blades. Serrated Spines is popular in the solo lane as kind of a bully against solo laners like Misha, where you get a lot of free attacks. But in this environment, in the competitive environment, you can see how much damage that landing one auto attack can do. It costs no mana, and it just has a decent cooldown. It can allow you to kind of take a little bit of extra damage that you're kind of missing and bring that to the table. I like to bring up a lot of times, like, it reminds me of like Ignite from League of Legends. Ignite reduces healing, but there are a lot of cases in the early game specifically where Ignite leads to a kill that you otherwise wouldn't have led to. And so adding just a teeny bit more damage than these other two talents would bring in the early game is really valuable. Not to mention that Envenom Spines can also poison structures. So if you really need to take out a structure, it can be really valuable for that as well. You can keep in mind, again, the early portions of the game, he's focusing on macro. He is taking out the minions, he is poking the enemy laner, and he is throwing all of his abilities out to the enemy structures. He's destroyed the front walls, he's destroyed the fountain, and he's also throwing a lot of damage. 8 Banelings all at the enemy fort all at once. He's about to get his Banelings back again now that he has his level 7. He has 8 more Banelings available, and so he's sending 2 and then 2 more to destroy the front line so that he can send a couple to the back line. He doesn't want all of them to die on the front line, he wants to save a couple. And so he sends all of them out to take out the back line, and there we go. And again, the cooldown's rolling very fast. We've lowered the cooldown because of this, and we are allowed even more. So there's just so much damage that's being thrown out. You're going to notice something. I'm talking a lot. I'm talking very quickly because this game is rather short. And in order to get the most value out of Zagara, it's all a value game in the early portions of the game. This build seems really strong, and it is, but it actually does fall off a bit as the game goes on. During team fights, tanks can kind of eat a lot of the Baneling damage, and they can even pop armor before they take all that damage. And you can lose a lot of your early fight value by just having your damage get tanked. Not just that, if people start fighting in minion waves or against other heroes that have summons or heroes that have protection, when you get to team fights, you do lose a lot of value. This build has a very early power spike, and so getting that damage off early is extremely important if you're going to learn anything from this guide. Also, the Poison Spine took him out, so that level 4 talent is really valuable. But if you're going to learn anything from this guide, I want you to learn 2 things. 1, this will likely get nerfed, but it should still be very strong even after the nerf. And 2, early game value is going to be the way to actually carry with this. Just because you have a lot of damage during team fights doesn't really mean it's going to go exactly where you want it to go. And that's why this early value is going to be more important than most of whatever else you think you're going to have from playing Zagara. So he places a couple creep for vision, grabs his fountain. Level 10, he does go with Devouring Maw. And as far as the rest of the build, because we might not see it, all three of the talents at 13 are viable. It just depends on what kind of damage you're going to take. Level 16, people are generally taking Corrosive Saliva, but there is definitely potential for the other talents as well. I personally really like Mutalisk, but it's not something that you need to take. In fact, I've been taking Hydralisk, Mutalisk, and the Pack Instinct, so that I can heal 60% of the damage dealt by the Mutalisk, which does bouncing attacks, as well as whatever my Mutalisk deals damage to, I then do 25% more damage to. Because the Mutalisk is doing bouncing attacks, you increase the damage that your Q does to everything. So in Q build, I personally like that version of the build, with Hydralisk, Mutalisk, and then Pack Instinct. But you can certainly try out some of the other talents as well. I don't think that you need this talent in this build because you don't get a lot of opportunities to auto attack in the late game. I would rather summon a Mutalisk and then throw a bunch of Qs out. But we do see Devouring Maw got picked up, and he does throw all of his Qs out and hit just about everyone on their team, leading to basically the start of the end of the game. His leads that he gave to the early portions of the game were key to setting an advantage for his team. But that play right there basically was several nails in the coffin for the opposing team. And so this is something that you really need to get, is that value, so you get a couple level lead, Devouring Maw, so that you can lead to potential fights. And I mean, just look at that damage. And again, he also used the Envenom Spines. Doesn't cost any mana. It's got a decent cooldown, but if you can speed up anything, it's honestly so worth it to always try. He throws out a couple more, and he sits on this. He waits until his team gets close to turn in, and once they go for the turn in, he grabs the boss. It looks like he's waiting just a little bit. You want that overwhelming nature, and that's it. That is Zagara. So, again, few things you want to know. This build will most likely get nerfed. I would imagine the cooldown portion of this is going to be removed, and the extra charge might drop down to 3. I think that would probably be the safest way to balance this, but that would still be a very viable build. Now, if the cooldown portion of this is removed, you might not actually need that talent, and you can kind of switch into the slow if you want to. But I do think that would be one of the ways to answer this. And early game, apply as much pressure as possible. Bully the enemy laners. You're one of the best lane bullies in the game. And utilize your AoE. You can see he went in the middle of that wave when he did his Q. You may need to do that if you want to double soak. Otherwise, just bully as much as you can early game. Look to get some structure damage off as early as possible. And see what value you can bring to your team earlier than later. So, if you guys were curious, you were watching CCL, and you saw that Zagara went from being played almost never to being first pick, first ban priority this last weekend, then you should know now why Zagara is currently in that priority, doing almost half of Joanna's health, just being hooked through all those Banelings. I mean, it's crazy damage. Like, the tanks can eat the damage, but it's just such a risk to do that. Level 16, again, like I said, Corrosive Saliva is what most people are taking. And I definitely think Corrosive Saliva is a strong talent. I've just kind of made the adjustment to going a little bit of a safer route. Tankier, more self-healing, everything like that. But definitely look into this build and potentially try out my variant of it and see which ones you like. Keep in mind when you're working on a competitive game versus Storm League, yeah, this one doesn't count. If you're working with a game competitive teams compared to Storm League, look at that. I mean, just shredded. There's a couple adjustments you have to make in builds. One, builds need to be safer, builds need to be more consistent, and builds cannot rely on you attacking something for long periods of time. And so oftentimes people will take talents that do weaker value sooner than greater value over time, just because you need that immediately. And same thing with even this talent. Like, do you want to take a talent that gets a lot better at 20, or do you want to take a talent that's more valuable right away when you pick it? And also keep in mind, this is percent health. If they are pretty beefy with two things that are high health, then you definitely want to take that. If they're more poke, then you might want to have extra self healing. Like, there's a lot of options that you can do. But Zagara is pretty fun right now, and in her current state, she's rather strong, and I expect her to probably stay strong for a few weeks, and she'll probably get a nerf to Q build, but I'd imagine it's probably not going to be a big enough nerf to take her out of the meta. So if you enjoy playing Zagara, now is a great time to play Zagara, get some practice in her, try out a new build that hasn't been used as often, and make adaptations where you feel they are necessary. Hopefully this video helps you out, and hopefully you've learned why the pros play Zagara, as well as how you can take this into your standard games outside of the professional level. Thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.